Everybody could be seated. We're going to start the meeting, please. Good evening. My name is Jake Hetchloyan. I'm a member of Friends of Mahalapu, and we'd like to welcome you to our meeting tonight. I'd like to start out by letting you know Friends of Mahalapu is pro-agriculture and pro a sustainable dairy on Kauai as long as it does not harm our environment, pollute our streams and oceans, and endanger our drinking water. Tonight, we want to explain to you some important points which should trigger the government to require the industrial dairy to conduct an environmental assessment. The Waiapili stream running through the property of the proposed industrial dairy is already polluted. Dr. Carl Berg with Surfrider, Kauai Blue Water Task Force, will explain the test he has conducted. Carl?
My name is Dr. Carl Berg. I'm a marine biologist, environmental scientist, and have been working on water quality issues on Kauai for approximately 20-something years. I am fortunate enough to work with a nonprofit organization called Surfrider Foundation. And Surfrider Foundation is all about the clean water, clean air, and beach access, and for all users, for the animals and people alike. We do monthly water sampling all around the island. I have about 18 different volunteers, and on the second Saturday of each month, we go out in our respective places, get a water sample, and test it for bacteria that would indicate whether or not there's sewage pollution. And as I said, we do this on a regular basis, and so we can therefore tell the community through our website how clean the water is, and we can highlight spots that are not very clean and try and get the government to do something about it. In March of this past year, the dairy farm came in and announced their plans initially at the Kauai Community College meeting and then later in Koloa about putting a dairy farm in Mahalapu. And it was that evening and the next morning that my email rings off the hook with all the surf riders saying, hey, are we sampling out there? Don't you think we should sample? Because we all know it's a pristine spot, and we should sample before they get in there and do anything to see if, in fact, they are polluting the water. You can't say they're polluting it if they say, oh, it's always been like that. So I called up one of my Surfrider samplers, Phil, and Phil went out, and then later Steve, and then myself, and we started in this program of sampling the water in what is known as Waiapili Stream, which enters the ocean right by the Gillen House, for those of you who are familiar with that area. And the stream goes way back into the watershed. And what I have here, and you have as the first page of your booklet there, are the values of the Enterococcus bacteria, and if you can't see it here, you can look on your package, that we get from all around the islands. And so this is what I sent out a couple weeks ago for our monthly sampling. And what is on the right-hand column from all these different spots is the average. In scientific terms, it's a geometric mean. So we're doing the exact same test as the Department of Health, and we're analyzing the data in the exact same way. And what we come up with is a relative value of how clean the water is. And so the geomean of these samples should be less than 35. And almost all of our waters, all of these surf spots, are way less than 35. It's clean. So if someone after this meeting asks you, and I do get inquiries from visitors who are coming here and say, hey, I heard there's problems. Is it clean or isn't it clean? I can say, man, it's clean. You want to know how clean? Go to kauai.surfrider.org and you can see how clean it is. But when we get near the streams seem to be the source of pollution. So the fecal matter from animals or from cesspools or septic systems seems to come down in the streams. And the streams, which I've highlighted in red, have significantly higher bacteria counts. They're supposed to be 35. So Kalapaki Bay, That's the Hulia River enters there. Waimea River entering. But the thing that I want to point out is down at the bottom, that Waiopili Stream, and we have measured this for a number of times, has an average of 8,806. So that's approximately 250 times what it's supposed to be. This is way off the scale. And being a scientist, I like looking at numbers. It's also over twice. If you add all the rest of them up, it's over twice the concentration. This thing is off the wall. It's worse than the LOI Canal. And we all thought this was a pristine stream. So I don't know where it's coming from. Now, you can, let's just say a horse walked in the stream and pooped in the stream, and you took your sample, and that's why you got high counts. Okay, next page. Next page in your packet. I had a couple of student interns that came, Katie Lee, I don't know if her parents are here tonight, came and helped me all summer taking water samples, and we took samples every single week. And so for the summertime, we took 10 weeks in a row, we took samples, and at the beach, the count, at the beach in front of Gillen's, it's 831. That means people swimming in front of the Gillen's house in that water are swimming in polluted water. But if you look at the stream by the cave site, again, 10 times in the summer, it's 8,772. So this means that it is chronically polluted, or on the average, it's polluted. And background level is polluted. And the Department of Health did other tests. They came out and did other tests with other bacteria and DNA testing, and all of them seems to indicate there's some sort of human sewage going in there. But the water smells, looks, it's nasty, and for the first time in my 20 years of sampling here, I got a bad leg infection because I didn't wash off in the ocean afterwards right away. So we are really concerned because the dairy farm took over in January, and they filed best management practice. They got a soil and water conservation plan, and they said they were going to keep all of the mud out of the river and streams, and there wasn't going to be any pollution in there. But our tests for bacteria, for nutrients, or for mud shows that over the past 6 months or something, they have already polluted that water from somewhere up in the valley there. So we did not go and try to find out where it's all coming from. The Department of Health will be going out early next month to see where it really is coming from. But what we do know is coming from Grove Farm property back up in the valley. So in the advertisement that was put in the newspaper today from Hawaii Dairy Farms, they say, we will prove it. We will monitor water quality on a regular basis to assess and maintain the effectiveness of our irrigation, nutrient management, and conservation practices. I don't know if they've started monitoring it, but we have, and the data says they're not doing a very good job at it. So Surfrider is going to continue to monitor the water quality in that area, in the stream where it comes out, because again, Surfrider is concerned about the ocean quality. And we are pushing now for the Department of Health to do a thorough investigation. In talking to a number of people about where could possibly this high bacteria come from, some people mentioned that, oh, there's all the trucks taking the sewage sludge down that road. I didn't know anything about it. Do you know anything about that? So I asked the Department of Health, and sure enough, across from CGM Stables, Mauka, there is a big field, and 4 sewage treatment plants bring all of their sewage sludge and dump it there, and it's tilled into the soil there. And they average, we've met with them in Honolulu, and they average 260 tons of dry sewage sludge a year on that spot. Now, I have no idea how it could go through lava tubes and cinders and get down into the water. And that's not my job. I monitor the ocean. But to put this in perspective, the amount of manure that they're planning on dumping with the cows is 12 and a half times that. So 12 and a half times, it's, I forget, 8,000 tons. But I did the math today with Bridget's help. So we're looking at a huge amount of manure, which has nutrients in it and also has bacteria in it and antibiotics in it and stuff like that. So this is really of concern to myself and is concern to Surfrider, and we think it should be of concern to you that if this does go through, that they do have effective best management practices in place so that none of the nutrients or the mud or the bacteria get into the water of the stream, destroying that native Hawaiian stream habitat, or get into the ocean and hurt the reefs off there. And in closing, is the person who saw all the dead fish on the beach here tonight? So, what does this mean? We had a hurricane. You sort of remember this a couple days ago. But somebody was walking on the beach in the morning and found dozens of dead fish on the beach, right where the water comes out from the stream and further up. I have no idea why those humahu manuku manuku apua would be dead and dying. I don't have a picture, and that's why I'd like to talk to somebody. But that's the kind of thing, when you have pollution coming out of the streams into the ocean, that it can have a real effect. We'll answer questions later. Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Berg. Our next speaker is Bridget Hammerquist. She's a member of Friends of Mahalapu, who is a retired attorney and a biologist, and she's going to explain the next three important points to you. The first one are drinking water wells that supply over 80% of our drinking water to Kaloa Poipu is within 750 feet where the proposed industrial dairy will pump the manure sludge. Next, she will go over the federal agency, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, studied the proposed site just this June of this year and determined that over 60% of the site is very high risk for runoff due to the fact the soil is clay-based. And then finally, she'll talk about the public trust doctrine, which comes from the Constitution of the state of Hawaii and protects our land and natural resources, including water. She will explain the waters of the state belong to its citizens and cannot be commercially diverted if it deprives the citizens. But first, she'll give you an update on the current status of the industrial dairy since the last public meeting and give you a background and basic information on the industrial dairy. Bridget Hammerquist.
Thank you all for coming tonight. It's been a lot of months and a lot of study. I am a biologist by training. I became a nurse. And then at some point when I was supporting children and wondering how I was going to put them through college, I went to law school. And I worked in medical negligence litigation. Not exactly the field that we have here, but still science was always my focus. When I first heard about the dairy, I thought, that's a lot of cows from Ulepu. What's it going to do? There's a real issue with cows because the material that they produce daily, milk, that's one thing that's good, but they also produce a lot of waste, a lot of urine, and a lot of manure. And I had a neighbor say to me, why are you so concerned? And I said, well, you have to understand, each cow has manure 143 pounds per day. So that's one of me every day, and that's a lot of waste. It doesn't collect real readily. We have somebody here tonight who's a soil scientist who was kind enough to come and tell us kind of what the process is of manure when it hits the ground and what goes on and what happens. In this particular plan, we, a whole bunch of us got together, not just me, I've had a lot of help. We studied the plan for where it's going to be located, what are the resources around them, What are they going to produce? What's it going to do to Kauai? And the issue with the waste was, if it stays on the ground as planned, what is really going to keep it on the farm? Not being our area of expertise and having done what I did for a living, I went out and found experts to look at the plan. People that had been in dairy science all their life. One of the gentlemen who was really kind and spent a lot of time with us is a professor back at the University of Nebraska. His father owned the largest dairy farm in the state of Nebraska, and his name is Bill Krantz. And he now spends his time as a professor helping community farmers figure out how much land they need to safely spread waste and how they irrigate so they don't over-pollute the ground. The pollution issues are the bacteria, as Dr. Berg said, that comes in waste, nitrates, ammonia, sulfides. There's a lot of factors, and really, manure is about 80% moisture, but when the moisture comes off the manure, either going into the ground or running off, whichever it does, it also is laden with bacteria. There were some studies done by the dairy industry back in Wisconsin, and Dr. Chastain and the CDC got involved, and they concluded that manure was approximately 160 times more toxic than raw municipal sewage. When I tried to get a handle on the volume of waste that would be produced, one of the things I did was I figured out the tonnage, and I called the landfill management offices here on Kauai, and I said, about how many tons of garbage waste is brought to you monthly? And they said, about 6,000. And I said, okay. And then I computed what the cows are going to produce, and it was going to, the current herd, the startup herd, in its manure and urine is going to produce 25% of what goes to the landfill for the entire island. And that's going to be just at that one little location in Mahalapu. When the herd advances to 2,000, which is the intended plan, it's going to produce more than is collected by the landfill from the entire island. So what's going to happen to it? Is it really going to stay on the farm? And we started taking a very serious, hard look at that. And we talked to scientists, as I said. And in the process, we also have met with the state, and we really wanted to understand the status. So these are just some real limited basics, okay? They're going to have a 578-acre industrial farm, 578 acres. On it, they want to start with 699 cows that are pregnant for lactating, so they get milk. So in a matter of months, they'll double their herd. Those cows will graze on approximately 470 to 500 acres. But the way they're grazing is not on the whole acreage. They're using a system called rotational grazing. They concentrate them in a parcel. The parcels are all around 4 acres, some as much as 5, but most are 4. So they're grazing them in what they call mobs, 115 cows on a parcel for 24 hours a day. They'll use 6 parcels, approximately 24 acres every day total, and all the waste, all the pee, is going to go on that 24 acres. And then the next day they rotate to the next 6 parcels, or 24 to 27 acres, and so on. And after 17 days, on the 18th day, they come back to the parcel they started on, and they'll have used the whole farm. So every 18 days, they'll be redepositing that waste on the first 6 parcels they started on. And there's a gentleman here tonight that's going to help us. He's a soil scientist with a little bit of an understanding of what happens to manure, because I thought to myself, well, even if there is grass growing, is it really going to take it all up in just 17 days? When another pile, another load comes, and then when the rains come, isn't it going to run, and where is it going to go? Basically, the experts that have reviewed the plan have said to us, there's nothing in here, there's no factual element in here that you can rely on that'll keep the waste on this industrial dairy site. Primarily because so much of it is clay-based soil and at real high risk for runoff, but also just because of the volume of waste in the confined area that they plan. So I looked at the paper this morning, as Carl said, and I saw this full-page ad, and I thought, wow, are they trying to discourage people from coming? Okay, let's set the record straight, they said. Well, we're here tonight to tell you that we're not doing anything other than relying on facts. And in an effort to get the facts out, we prepared packets for you to take home. We tried to study the important parts of the plan. But just to answer real briefly some of their charges, they've said Hawaii Dairy Farms is committed to local families. I don't think that's the case from anything they're proposing to do. They're going to create a health hazard. It's going to go into the streams. It already is. Fortunately, Surfrider decided to get a baseline. In the process, they found out there was grave pollution already there just from the grubbing and grading and the moving of dirt and the plants that were removed. And in the process, something else is contributing to the stream up in the valley, as Carl said. Nobody knows what it is. But what it did say, even to the State Department of Health, was that you can't add anything else in there until that's cleaned up. It doesn't make any sense, and they're pushing. They're ready. They want the cows to come. But it does not make any sense to bring them in until, one, they have their plan approved, and two, the problem that's there isn't there anymore. We asked the state officials in the Clean Water Branch for these numbers that Surfrider has collected and reported monthly to the state. How long does it take to clean it up? They said it can take years. And I don't think Hawaii Dairy Farms has come to an appreciation of that yet. But in any case, there's no question that what they're going to add is going to put a further strain on the land. What they're bringing is going to attract flies. The type of flies that will come are biting flies. Eileen will talk a little bit about that, but I'll just tell you that in your packet, we have a letter from a gentleman with a home in Princeville. He's away right now getting medical care, but he and his wife live here, and he's a retired industrial entomologist. He actually worked in dairies, in livestock industry, and he talks about that in his letter. He identifies the number of flies that'll come. He says it'll be in the billions. They very much are attracted to manure. They lay their eggs, they hatch, and our weather here is so ideal with the moisture and the warmth that he said in a matter of months we'll have billions of biting flies. The trade winds will carry them 5 miles. That's their average dispersal. So all the residences, all the homes in the area, all the people who love the beaches, the local people, the families that they say they're taking care of, are going to be subjected to this because of its location. And I have to tell you, we really aren't against ag. I grew up on a sugar plantation. I watched my dad go to work every day, loving ag. And it's not what we're about. We're about safety. The next thing in the ad is that HDF milk will be sold, will stay here in the state, and they say that pretty regularly. Good for Kauai's kids was one of their themes until it came out that, thank you, until it came out that actually the milk is all going to Oahu to be bottled and processed and sold. It's actually being sold to Meadow Gold. Hawaii Dairy Farms doesn't own the milk once they sell it to Meadow Gold. Meadow Gold does. And what we found when we went to our most recent meeting with the state, when we were trying to see where the permits were, and none of them have been issued yet, is we met with one of the divisions called the sanitation branch, and they're responsible for issuing a permit that helps them in the process of getting their milking parlor going and their whole milking operation going. And they said to us, don't worry, this dairy is they've been asked to produce the milk to an international level. Yes, they're selling it to Meadow Gold, and if Meadow Gold was going to keep it just in the state, they wouldn't have to comply with international standards. Selling in state, they don't need to meet this. So you guys you can rest comfortably because they're meeting a higher standard. And then I actually went back to their original plan and found it on page 23 of the plan that the milk pumping needs to comply with international industry hygiene standards. So I don't really think Hawaii Dairy Farms has been very straight with the public, and I don't think they're giving us the facts. So we would agree with them that an agricultural operation is a good idea. Sustainable food to stay in a community is a great idea. But I don't think that's what they're doing. You can form your own opinion. But they're complying with international standards. They want Meadow Gold to be able to sell to military, to cruise ships, and internationally. That's what we were told straight by the people from the Department of Health. They say they're perpetuating Maha Ulepu's agricultural heritage. Maha Ulepu has a heritage. It's a big part of the reason that many of us who love Maha Ulepu have fought for it. But it's not always been agricultural. That's only been since the late 1800s. It was agricultural to the extent that the Hawaiians had small areas that the families farmed, but it wasn't industrial until long into the late 1800s. It does have a heiau. It does have culturally significant sites, and it does have culturally significant practices that are still underway. And there are a lot of Hawaiian people that fish there and rely on Maha Ulepu for the apuaha, for going in and getting peace. They make treks, they visit certain sites in there, and that's all going to come to a grinding halt. So I disagree with their statement that they're perpetuating Maha Ulepu's heritage. They say they listened to the communities concerned and modified their plans. Their plan modification, filed with the state July 23rd this year, went down to 699 pregnant cows instead of starting with 1,880, which was their original plan. It's a modification, but they're all coming in 2 cows when they come, or shortly thereafter, they'll be giving birth. So it's not really that much of a modification. The manure load on the first initial startup herd is 3 million pounds a month. 3 million pounds a month of manure and 210,000 gallons of urine. They're going to make about 200,000 gallons of milk, which they'll take away, and the waste will be left behind to be handled by that beautiful valley. So we took some pictures for you of the valley, and you'll see them right after the charts that Surfrider prepared, and we have a fact sheet where you can get some additional data that we prepared, and we've got a website, and it's on the fact sheet. It's friendsofmahalapu.org right at the top. We invite you to go there and see all of the material that we've tried to compile, the New Zealand experience, the articles and the government reports. But if you look at the pictures that we took are intended to show the streams as they come across the farm. You can see them. And then if you go to the second page, you'll see something that I think is very telling, so does Dr. Berg, and that's a planned cow raceway. So what they've done so far is they've gone in and graded and grubbed and prepared some pasture land. Some of it's growing, a lot of it isn't growing very well. But the ditches have been restored. They cleared the old ditches. And for those of you who happen to be at the Lihue Business Association meeting, we asked the HDF representatives, where do the ditches drain? Where do they go? And they said the ocean. And if you look at that ditch and see all the muddy water that's already in it, just from their initial, that's what Carl's testing. That's where he got the numbers of the turbidity that's 500 times normal. The pollution, nitrates are in there already. Maybe from animals that were in there earlier, maybe from feral pigs that are still in there. Like he said, it's going to take some studies to figure it out, but the bottom line is it's already polluted. But if you picture a farm with cows pooping and leaving it on the land, and a land application is what is intended, and it rains and it liquefies, what's going to keep it from going in those ditches that run to the ocean? What's going to keep it from going into the streams that run to the ocean? The specialists that we consulted could find nothing. I asked Dr. Kranz, I said, please look at it carefully. What assurance do we have that they will be zero discharge as they claim? And he said, you have none. I said, well, do you think there's any chance that it'll stay on the farm? He said, no. There's too many animals in too small an area, and they produce too much waste. They will not be able to contain it. So our position and our hope has been that people in the government, especially the Department of Health, because they're the licensing entity, that they would take this seriously and really consider encouraging them to find another location. It's just a really bad location. They say they're going beyond compliance requirements. Well, we met with the state. They talk about enlarging their effluent pond. And the state told us in April that they gave them their plan back and said they couldn't approve it and they needed to redo it. And Sina Pruder, who heads up the wastewater division, informed us that one of the things they had to do was make a bigger effluent pond. And they're still publishing a commercial that says the effluent pond can hold 100 days worth of effluent. Dr. Jean Myers is a PhD dairy specialist in UC Davis, and she said the only time that pond can hold 100 days is when it's empty. As soon as it starts to fill, the number of days of waste that it can collect and safely hold are numbered. They don't stay in the hundreds at all. And the dairy admits that as it rains, it's an open pond, it's going to collect rainwater. They admit that we've had series of days of rain. We had the famous period in 2006, which they don't put in their plan. They talk about 17 days of consecutive rain being kind of a record for our area, but actually many of us remember when it was closer to 40 days of consecutive rain. 31 inches, according to the state, fell in the first 30 days. All through that time that 31 inches would be falling, they couldn't irrigate, they couldn't use that effluent pond. And they are planning to water the pastures with the contents of the effluent pond. So in our course of meetings, we've met with, I'll just review that with you, Department of Health, we've met with officials from the EPA, and we've met with county council members. And I want to recognize, I know Gary Hooser's here tonight. I want to thank him for coming. And I understand Joanne Yukimura's here. And I will share with you that even though our county council members are not the people to issue the permits, they are still people that are very influential with the state. And they've been very open to meeting with us. I can report that of the candidates running, Felicia Cowden asked for a lot of material early on, studied it, and said, this is not a great location. Joanne Yukimura said that publicly at the political forums. Gary Hooser has also said he's concerned that they don't have backup plans. They have no other site to take the herd to if there's a hurricane. They have no shelter for this herd at any time. There's no barn that they can go into other than for 1 hour a day when they're milked. There's a milking parlor, they call it. But there's no shelter to get out of the elements. 24 hours a day, the cows are going to be out in the sun and the rain and the wind and sandstorms and whatever's going on in Mahalapu Valley, they're there. And I think that not only is it a bad location for us, I don't think it's a great location for the animals. They get pretty extreme weathers in there. We also had some very supportive comments from Tim Bynum and Jay Farfaro. And even the mayor now is serious about looking at this. I think to people in general, when you talk about bringing a dairy to an area, they think, well, making milk, it sounds pretty good. But when you start really looking at it and realizing that this is an industrial dairy, that this is a factory, what they call on the mainland a factory farm, it's a little different issue. And so one of the things that came up, as Carl said, were the wells. Initially, the wells weren't on our radar. We didn't really even appreciate they were in there. And the dairy doesn't do a lot to highlight that in their documents either. And I'll show you what I mean. Before I go on, I just also wanted to say that they talk about adding 6 million to the Kauai economy, and I don't know how they're going to do that. They're employing 10 to 15 people maximum, they said. And when we looked through their plan, I know Eileen and I found that it was pretty amazing that they said some key issues on the island are labor, availability, and limited dairy skills. But we've had dairies on this island, and I'm sure we have farmers today that are not limited in their dairy skills. So they say we're going to use a rotary platform, which is this fancy milking thing, because they're going to try and use high automation to keep down the number of bodies they're going to hire. So they're not even going to add to the labor force. Okay, so here's an overview for those of you who haven't had a chance to study the plan, and we loaded all the plans on the website. friendsofmahalapu.org has original plan, redacted plan, current plan. So you can compare it and go through the pages yourselves at your leisure. But I assure you, we really are working with the facts. So this is the overall dairy. You can see the outline of the dairy on the map. And in the center of it, you'll see a red outline square. This is the Horiguchi Taro Farm. And they have kind of pasture paddocks all the way around, and you'll get to see pictures of those. Up here is the milking parlor. And then they have an effluent pond over here, and that's highlighted. You can see the words effluent pond. And there's a pumping station down here, and that becomes important because this corner down at the bottom, and you'll see a picture of it, is where they plan 81 acres of manure and sledge pad. And what they mean by that is the cows are going to graze there and leave their waste. They'll be there for several days because if they're using 24 to 27 acres a day, the 81 acres they can stay in for 3 days easily, leaving over 300,000 pounds of waste just for the startup herd. But what becomes key is the fact that there are 3 Kaloa wells right next to that same corner. You can kind of use the pumping station as your guide, but you'll see Kaloa well F, Kaloa well C, and Kaloa well D is out at the perimeter out here, just about there. These boxes that diagram the wells and put in their true distance were done by an engineer at the water department. And the water department was very receptive when we went there because we sort of went on an, let's get educated mission and said, we noticed they talked about Kaloa well F in their text, but they didn't really talk about, and you'll see the actual page 8 that's in your book. They just mentioned the distance of one well to the farm, leaving the impression that that's the closest one, and it's more than a half mile away, they say, from the dairy facility site. So that sounds like pretty good, more than 2,600 feet. But we went to the water department. They didn't actually really know about the dairy. The engineer asked me, what dairy? And I looked back at the Hawaii Dairy Farms plan, and I saw they'd been in touch with the state about where water was on Kauai, but they hadn't really contacted Kauai County Water Department. So the engineer took, and he said, do you have the plan? I said, yes, I have it electronically. I'll send it to you. So he diagrammed in the actual distance of these wells. And one of them is actually a little under 750 feet, maybe closer to 700, because on the bottom of the page, you'll see that the dairy actually put a legend on there that tells you what the distance is every inch. And you can take a ruler at home and measure it yourselves. They didn't talk about Kaloa well C, just F, and F isn't a half mile, and C is just a little beyond F, and then there's D. And so we got looking at it and thinking, well, that's like right next to the dairy. What's the potential for migration of bacteria and waste into our drinking water? Because what I learned from the engineer is that the water from those 3 wells are pumped into our big tanks up on the hill and treated and distributed. They actually get 4 million gallons. That's what the capacity of our tanks are. And they just keep pumping and keeping that filled and with treated water. And that services all of Kaloa and Poipu. And it's right next to the dairy farm. Yeah. So the next page in your packet starts to identify all these paddocks by number. And you'll notice that on the number of the parcel, they also put the type of soil each parcel is. And I wanted you to have this. We wanted to share this with you. And in your packet, you'll see the page that actually identifies what the initials stand for. We included it. So you can look at a parcel and see what it is. And you can go check us out on the parcels that are right down by that pumping station. You can see what we found out, and that is that those happen to be one of the few areas on the farm with well-draining soil. And we thought, oh, so the areas that's going to sink in well, it's going to drain well, is the area closest to the wells. Not great. And this is another diagram that, further shows the critical features. Again, the parcels, the calving shed. They have things like they have a burial ground up at the top. They have there's sort of a water zone where a lot of our birds go. They highlight that. But you can see how small all these little parcels are. And they're all fenced off, and they're going to hold the cows in for 24 hours, and then they get to go to another small parcel. And then we get to the area that we were concerned about, which is the blocks for distribution of the manure sludge that collects in the bottom of the effluent pond. And we learned from the scientists who looked at this that manure sludge at the bottom of the effluent pond, when it comes out and gets exposed to air, it releases hydrogen sulfide gas. The hydrogen sulfide gas on farms in the mainland has killed workers because it's so lethal. And the reason it's so lethal is if there's any moisture in the air, it forms sulfuric acid. And there were accounts from upstate New York where people actually were outdoors when they desludged. You don't have to be that far away. You could be down on the beach when they desludge. And if you get hit with that hydrogen sulfide gas that happens to combine with moisture, it can actually burn your skin wherever it touches. And there were some, and I put them in, there were some accounts of people that had to have their eyelids removed because they were burned by sulfuric acid in the air. It was just traveling, captured in the air. But what I noticed is when they talked about spreading the manure, and again, I really do like to stay with the facts, all of a sudden the wells disappear from the page. There's no wells on that page, and you won't see where any freshwater sources are when they're distributing their manure sludge. And they're going to do that every 30 to 45 days. Basically, they have to empty the effluent ponds because they are a zero discharge industrial dairy. And what that means is all the waste made on the farm has to stay on the farm. It has to be used. And I listened when they were talking about how this amount of waste that's going to fall from these cows is 3 million pounds a month with a startup herd and 8,500,000 pounds when there's 2,000 cows. I listened to this man say, and we need more fertilizer. That's only 20% of what we'll need. And I'm thinking, what? That sounds like so much already. How could they need more? And then I thought, they have to empty the effluent ponds. It can't collect. They have to use it. So I'm not sure. I'm not a soil scientist. Rolly's better at that. There's a lot of people better at that than me. But I know that part of the motivation of irrigating with the contents of the effluent pond and spreading the manure sludge is because they physically have to. They have to empty it because they're collecting every day. Every time the cows go to the barn to be milked, they poop. They poop all along that raceway that ran next to the ditch. They say in their own material, they'll poop probably once going in and once coming back. And that poop, they're planning to wash off the raceways and run through drains to the effluent pond. And every time they're milked, they tend to pee and poo, and that's going to be collected to the effluent pond. What they do out in the pasture is going to stay on the ground in the pasture. But when they start desludging like this, in this one big block, you just have to compare the pages. Go back to page 9 and compare the diagram where the wells are. And you'll see it's right adjacent to this. And you can use the pages that give you the paddocks and the parcel numbers and the soil type, and you can figure out where you are. This is Mahalapu today, and this is kind of the way we want it to stay. It's the same area. Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to some other people who've got important things to say, and I'll be here for questions and answers. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Bridget. Our next speaker is Rolly Polilera, and he is going to talk about the risk of runoff versus zero discharge by Hawaii dairy farms. He is a soil scientist, and he'll explain all this to us. You want to stand? You want to sit?
Okay, I want to just clear up a little bit. I majored in soil science when I attended college, and my roommates for all those years were 2 dairy husbandry majors. And when they went out to the lab, dairy lab, and they returned to the room, I knew they were coming before I could see them, because they... The comment that I wanted to make is that when they presented the dairy program here, the lady spoke at that time, they made it sound like the cow ate the grass, and then they dropped the poop on the grass. The grass took up the manure that was in the soil, and it was a clean cycle. But what they didn't say is that nitrogen basically is what we're talking about. When it's in the soil, it drops down and it's in the ammonium form. And ammonium has a positive charge. The soil mixture has a negative charge. So they attach. So in the ammonium form, it will attach to clay particles and the makeup of the soil. But it only takes about 2 or 3 days of temperatures of 50 degrees or greater meaning it would even happen more quickly, for the ammonium to go through a process where it changed to nitrite to nitrate. Nitrate is the form of nitrogen that has a negative charge, and it will not attach to the soil medium or particles, however best I can say it, so you can understand it. So it moves with what we call the soil solution. So any water movement in between soil particles and whatnot, the nitrate is moving. So nitrate, first of all, both ammonium and nitrate can be lost by soil erosion. In other words, they can both be run off and run into streams as pollutants. But it's the nitrate that is a major concern. And so it's the one that through, when you load up the soil with a lot of water and whatnot, and it starts moving through in both directions, primarily down, but it can go in both directions. It's the nitrate that is of concern. They didn't explain that. And that's what you're going to find in well water. That's what you're going to find in the ocean. And when it hits the ocean, I think there's some present concerns that it, being a fertilizer, nitrogen, it creates a imbalance of the algae that the coral reefs and whatnot need in order to survive. In other words, some of them will come on, species will come on that are not wanted as far as the health of the coral reef goes. So that's the major concern that when I attended the first meeting and they presented it that way, I thought, you know, they're not saying anything about nitrate, and that's the one that is going to move in the soil and become a problem. So basically that's the only part that I kind of wanted to explain, unless somebody has a question later. But so I thank you. Excuse me? The nitrates in this. Yeah. Yeah. Well, like I say, when it gets into some areas, it disturbs the equilibrium between different types of plants. And I believe the people studying the coral now, there's a strong belief that it has created some of the species coming on stronger than others, which have a negative effect on the coral. Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah. It could if it's laying on top of the soil and it dries out before it gets fixed in the soil, it could blow and you could have some erosion in that respect.
What would happen? I mean, was that something that would get in your? I mean, obviously, if you breathe it in,
Yeah.
harmful to your lungs, not harmful to your lungs.
Yeah. I don't know, to be straight with you. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Just to follow up on that, if you read some of the New Zealand articles, they do report having to close down pastures, because if the nitrogen level gets so high, the cows eat the grass and actually the milk becomes polluted. It's not safe for us to have that in there. We're not meant to consume high nitrogen levels either. So they've actually had to move them off certain pastures because of nitrogen toxicity. And it takes a long time for the grass to absorb it enough and bring it back down to safe levels. So it is considered a pollutant. And Dr. Berg could probably answer questions about that more later.
Thank you. Thank you, Rolly. Our next topic is about the impact to the quality of life and the economic impact. Eileen Ketchloyan, who is my wife and a member of Friends of Mahalapu and was a real estate broker for 16 years, will provide information on this.
Hi, is this working? Yeah, okay. I wanted to share with all of you what happens to quality of life. My husband and I, prior to moving here, lived over in Washington State, and we had 30 acres of property there out in a rural setting. About 2.5 miles from us was a dairy. The dairy had 2,000 acres. In Washington State, they don't put all the cows in little tiny pieces. They actually spread them out. But what happened to us was that during the summer, during the cold months, no big deal. During the summer, first summer day, they would have a fly hatch. And we could not go outside our home without having a long sleeve shirt on, and we had to make sure it was buttoned because they'd crawl up your sleeve. We had to have long pants on. We had to wear socks and shoes. And so we didn't really get to enjoy our property if it was a nice day. My grandparents had a farm, and it was a dairy in Washington State. I don't have anything against agriculture. I don't have anything against dairies. I just don't want them so close to all of our people who have homes that would like to enjoy it. I don't want it so concentrated that the flies will get into the billions. These flies are what they call biting flies. And biting flies have serrated edges on their mouth. They will cut through your skin and suck the blood. Okay, they're similar to a mosquito. They live on the blood. Okay, so because of that, they become vectors of disease. In your handouts, there's a whole part just on the diseases that the cows can and the flies can bring. Those diseases are transmitted through the soil, through the water, and through the biting flies. If you also look in your packet, you'll see that there is information confirming the transfer of diseases from New Zealand and United States. And also you'll see that there's that letter from Carlos White, the etymologist. So the next thing I wanted to kind of talk about was visitors and tourism. Now, our South Shore is mostly for tourism. We know that on the internet, we have become a very social world. So can you imagine if you were thinking about where to go in Hawaii and you went on TripAdvisor and there was somebody that complained about being bit by flies? Or how about the odor? The odor is caused by the ammonia. The air gets methane gas, which you can't smell, which isn't healthy for you. It causes lung problems. Hydrogen sulfide, which when combined with water turns to sulfuric acid. The ammonia, but there's another one that no one's mentioned yet here, and that's the particles. The particles that get in the air, that get in your lungs. Those are all ways that they're going to get to you. When I was down collecting signatures for our petition at Poipu Beach, the lifeguard came up to me, and he said, I want to sign your petition. He goes, you don't know how bad that's going to be. And I said, what do you mean? And he goes, well, first of all, Mahaulepu, the currents run from Mahaulepu down to Poipu. And when they come down to Poipu, the ocean pushes the water into the little kiddie pond. The currents take it from Mahaulepu to our little kiddie pond. He goes, but there's no currents to take it out of the kiddie pond. So you have a little effluent pond. Now, what do you think that's going to do for our tourism? The other thing is just word of mouth. Someone come over here and have these problems, they're not coming back. So I wanted to also look at job losses. And I figured out who the biggest employer down here is, the Hyatt. So I called them. I found out that they employ over 1,000 people right now. I asked them how they felt it was going to affect them. They said it's already starting to affect us because what happens is we have conventions and conferences, and the coordinator for the convention or the conference books it a year out. And they said it has gotten out already amongst that industry that does the booking for conferences. And so we've already have less bookings than we expected. Less bookings than normal. And I said, what about job loss? They said, we've already had to start laying people off because it's already affecting us. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is the revenue to Kauai. Now, we all know that if the property taxes are a key issue to funding Kauai, if these cows come and it impacts our tourist industry, It's going to get rid of what currently in our property taxes for just the South Shore is 26% of all the property taxes collected on the island. So if property values drop, which they would, then the tax rate would drop, and the county would then have to look to everybody else for those property taxes that are now missing. When it comes to property values, I was a real estate broker for 16 years. And I know my gut reaction to this whole thing was, oh, our value of our houses will go down 25 to 50%. That was just my personal opinion. So I thought, well, I'll call some local agents and see what they think. And the local agents here thought it would be between 20 and 50%. So then I went onto the internet to see if there was any studies done about property values and near dairies or other mega industrial farms. The information I got was, it ranged from 6.6% to 88% of the value of your home would be lost. The way they categorized it was there were certain things that made a difference whether you lost the 6% or the 88%. One was the distance to the dairy. The second thing was whether or not, and this was really key, they expressed this several times, is whether or not it was downwind or upwind. Obviously, if you're upwind, you don't have to lose as much money. Now, we all know which way the wind blows. The other thing that they said would determine would be the number of cows. And they actually have a way of figuring it out, how much, what percentage it goes down for each 100 cows. It's actually 100 pounds of cow. Anyway, it's very precise. So the last thing is the number of days per month that there is odor. And based on my own personal review of the plan, the desludging, which will take approximately 4 days a month if you spread it out every month and give it each an even amount, so that you'd have 4 days a month. And then the spraying of the effluent would also smell, and it would get in the wind. And that would be, they said in their thing that it takes 40 hours for them to make one cycle over their pastures. So it would, and that they would be doing each pasture with effluent every 7 days. So that would be 10 days out of the week that you'd have smell, and plus the 4 days for the desludging. So that's 14 days. Now, I know that there's been examples that I read about where it was 1 day a month where there was smell. It went down 20% when they were in really close proximity. So on that, I'm going to close up and let them talk again.
Thank you, Eileen. Okay, we have 2 more topics that we want to share with you tonight before we open it to answers and questions. And the first is the public trust doctrine, which comes from the Constitution of the State of Hawaii and protects our land and natural resources, including water. Bridget Hammerchrist will explain the waters of the state belong to all citizens and cannot be commercially diverted if it deprives the citizens. And last, she will go over our legal options. Bridget.
Thank you. Thanks. Basically, and I'll just say it as concisely as I can, Article 11, Section 1 of the Hawaii Constitution actually directs all government officials and all sub-agencies to maintain the natural resources of the state for the people today and the people to come. And that includes water. And this got into the issue of the amount of water that this industrial dairy is proposing to use. We talked about their waste. They're proposing to use 3 million gallons a day, which they're going to draw off the Waitaw Reservoir. And I think I indicated that even our county council has been actively involved trying to just make sure this was an okay plan. And they were asked to respond to a couple of the members of the county council on what will you do if you can't get 3 million gallons a day from the Waitaw Reservoir. And Eileen went back and looked through their plan again, and we noticed that their original plan, on page 31, you can compare this yourself, in their original plan, they report that they're going to have to build one freshwater pond just to hold water for the days in the summer when it's hot, because Pioneer has priority over the waters coming from the Waitaw Reservoir. In the most recent plan, they still are building the 10 by 10 by 2 meter pond, but they no longer reference Pioneer. They just say they have to build that so they have sufficient irrigation water in the summer months. I don't know where Pioneer went. I think their fields are still there. I would imagine they still have a tug on the Waitaw Reservoir. But what is the Waitaw Reservoir? Eileen and I attended the conference that took place before the county council, and it was called a water workshop. And it was really informative. And I would encourage all of you, if anybody has the time and the interest, the William Richardson School of Law and the USGS, our Geologic Services and offices on Oahu, are going to be speaking tomorrow at KCC, and they're making a presentation between 9 and noon on this very issue. And they're going to be explaining about the waters in what they call the Puna district, that's Lihue and Hanamalu primarily. And the fact is they're taking down the river diversions that the sugar industry used to have that diverted waters from their natural flow so that there's better flow of water down through pastures, down through fields. It'll help taro farmers, and it'll help to restore the natural flow of the waters in the state, and it's going to help to restore the waters in our wells. About 10 years ago, the county noticed that the wells are starting to dry up on the island, and no one knew exactly what the cause was. Well, the U.S. Geological Services came in and did a fairly extensive study, and my understanding is that they concluded that the biggest deterrent for the wells having their normal volume was the fact that there was a whole bunch of groundwater that used to be distributed to irrigate the sugarcane. And that groundwater in all those ditches would bring water, surface water, over massive amounts of land that then trickle down, would get into aquifers, and would get back in and recharge the wells. That's not happening now. But restoring the flow, the stream flow, is something that could make it happen again. Take it back to 58. I think this is it. So again, we got into the picture of looking at the farm and how much they intend to irrigate 3 million gallons a day. And it brought to mind this public trust doctrine. And I thought, well, if the Huleia River diversion, which is Mauka of the tree tunnel, gets taken down by a petition made to restore waters to natural flow, the Waitaw Reservoir isn't going to have the volume that it used to have. So one of our council people specifically asked the dairy to come in with an alternative plan. Where will you get the water for the cows at the rate of 3 million gallons a day? And that's not their drinking water. That's not what washes their udders. That's just the water they're needing for their irrigation in their fields. Where are you going to get water? And after they were asked, 6 weeks later, they came back with a letter saying, you'll have to talk to our landlord because our landlord promised us 3 million gallons a day. And that's Grove Farm. So that's another reason why we really believe strongly that this is not a great location. And how will the public trust doctrine help us? Well, to make them think again about where the location should be, they need to know that that water is not going to be there forever. It is 100% diverted right now. It's out of its natural flow. The sugar industry is not using it, and it does need to get restored so farmers can use it. And it will probably happen. There's been 2 Hawaii State Supreme Court cases. We've looked at what we might need to do if the dairy somehow survives all the hurdles that are facing it right now and gets an approval to operate. And we've been in touch with Earth Justice and the Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation, both of whom are interested in the case because of the potential damage to the environment, the potential damage to the heritage, the disruption of the Hawaiians' ability to use this place, and for the peoples in the future. So that's all in the offing. And I wanted to share with you one of the greatest reasons we're concerned. When they have in their paper, hearken to the facts, we say yes, hearken to the facts. And the facts are that the dairy farm never disclosed the Natural Resource Conservation Service report that Jay referred to earlier. Done June 5th, 2014. You can read it, it's on the web. And it does conclude that most of the farm will not tolerate, they use the term very limited, in its ability to tolerate a land waste application. You might have read in the paper something about the local temperature. I put it in your packet. There's 2 pages 59. One is from the redacted plan, one is from their current plan. The exact same sentence, typed with the exact same words. The only thing in it is they changed the temperature range. Why did that happen? Well, when the plan first came out, we noticed they said the local average temperature range, those phrases, local average temperature range, was 43 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, ideal for Kikuyu. Yeah, that's what we did too. When in Mahalapu. When they came out with their final plan, filed July 23rd, they didn't disclose what the NRCS, a federal agency, a division of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, had found. And they just sort of changed the temperature in that sentence to 60 to 104 degrees. Still reads the same. The average local temperature range is 60 to 104 degrees, ideal for Kikuyu. Okay, I don't know which is ideal for Kikuyu, and that was chalked off as a typo. So we looked at, with the water department, and they're looking at it now, the well capture zone, because they're going to put a lot of water, and there's going to be a lot of urine on this land and a lot of manure on this land. And where these wells get their supply from is going to be identified through a study of what's called the well capture zone. And for those of you who don't know, as I didn't, there's a drinking water branch in the Department of Health. And they created well capture zones that were finished in 2004, and they're called SWAP reports. It's source water assessment plans. And they actually study and figure out how, like these wells are 750 to 700 feet away from this area they're desludging. They figured out these circular patterns to conclude how those wells are charged from groundwaters that run in that area. And we know there's the Waiopili stream, we know there's the Wailau stream, we know there's rainfall, so there's a lot to be considered. But what we don't want is a bunch of liquefied waste running into the ocean. And I think that's the biggest risk. And we're committed, Friends of Mahalapu are committed. If you want to join us, we'd love to have more friends and fill out the forms. We may have to initiate litigation, but I will tell you from the bottom of my heart, having been a litigator for 25 years, we've been doing everything we can to avoid that eventuality. We really want to say, look, the science isn't there at this location. You haven't brought the cows. There's nothing built. There's no building permits. There's no milking permits. Now is the time before the harm is done. Thanks again.
Thank you, Bridget. We'd like to now open it up for answers to your questions. Very good question. First of all, in closing, I was going to say this, but I'll say it now, is that we feel the best person to call right now is Gary Gill, who is the Deputy Director of the State Department of Health. His number is 808-586-4424. I'll say that again. 808-586-4424. Gary Gill. We also think that you should call your county council members. We think you should write letters to the editor, and we obviously would love you to join Friends of Mahalapu. We have a pamphlet with you, you can fill out your email. We'll keep you current, and you can help us in our fight. Thank you.
Can I just make one comment about what you said with the letter to the editor? Just so all of you know, it's very, very simple. I wrote a letter, I sent it to the editor of the paper, it was published within 2 days. So it's super easy. You can say whatever you want, you can talk about any part of your, yes. You can talk about the smallest concern you have to, you can review the plans, you can get scientific, but chances are it's going to be really easy for you to get your voice heard through that paper.
Yeah, there's actually a email address, and it's bbuley, B-U-L-E-Y, B, and then B-U-L-E-Y, at thegardenisland.com. He's our editor. And we have an environmental reporter that's done a great job, I think, trying to cover this issue, and that's Chris D'Angelo. Oh, he may be here. I don't know. Hey, Chris. And he can be reached at C. D'Angelo, and that's C-D-A-N-G-E-L-O, at thegardenisland.com. And they do welcome hearing from us. So, and I think the council members need to know how you guys feel. They really do. And we had Gary Gill's phone number, but you can always just call the number and ask for his email address too, or ask for his snail mail address, because I'm sure he's not going to be able to take all our calls. But the main thing is, there's a phone number and you can find out how to reach him and be in touch. Thanks. I hope that answers it.
Yes. Go ahead and answer that.
The Hyatt did file a lawsuit in July of this year, and their suit is asking the court to enforce a state statute, it's 343, and require the dairy to complete an environmental assessment before they operate. The basis of that suit, and we have a gentleman with us who I think worked on that statute, Gary Huser, when he was in the legislature. The basis of that statute, and Gary, you correct me if I'm wrong, they modified it, they amended it some years ago, I think about 2006 or 2009, can't remember the year, but they added a section that said, if a operation is going to deal with waste that exceeds that which would be produced by 50 residences, they have to do an environmental assessment. And so it's in the statute, and what the firm representing the Hyatt did was they went to the court and said, we've asked them to do the environmental assessment, we've asked the state to make them do an environmental assessment. Basically, they're saying to the court, we need your help. The law is here. It's clear. There's no question they're going to have a waste treatment operation. Look at their plan. Go to section 7.0. It's actually entitled wastewater treatment. And they go on for pages talking about how they're going to be treating their wastewater. So, and they're clearly dealing with waste that exceeds that which would be produced by 50 households. So I don't think there's too much question that the statute should apply. And I will tell you this, I thought it was interesting, when the county built the newest well in Mahalapu for drinking water for Poipu and Kaloa, you know, where there was that whole kind of moratorium for a while we were getting more water to this area, they put in a brand new well down there, that's Kaloa Well F. They were putting in a well, and the county water department did an environmental assessment. So I think a large industrial dairy should have to as well. Well, it depends on the court's calendar. Oh, the question was, when will there be a decision on the Hyatt's lawsuit? And I said it actually depends on the court's calendar. They file the action. There is no hearing on the docket yet. So when they file civil litigation in general, when you file a lawsuit, you kind of get in line with behind other items that are already on the calendar. So whether it's going to take another half year for them to have a hearing, another year, I did call the attorneys for the Hyatt and asked, and all they could tell me was we don't have a hearing date yet. And they're still working on a cooperative way with the Department of Health too to try and get it, trying to get the governmental entities involved in asking for it.
Can there be an injunction set forth, cease and desist?
There is a way to go to court and ask for what's called a preliminary injunction, which means you ask for an activity to be stopped in advance of a harm. It's the highest burden to do when you're in a court, because if you're going in and saying, make them stop because they're hurting me, and you can establish there's damage, that's the easier route. Going in to get an injunction before they start operating, it's a little bit tougher, and the courts are not as willing to do it unless there's sufficient certainty about the harm that's about to occur. Yeah. And I think what we've tried to point out to the state and working with the state and the EPA is really all of the science in this, there is sufficient certainty of the harm that's going to occur.
One more question for Gary, maybe. Are there hazard signs posted on the Ulepu yet?
The question that the gentleman asked was, are there warning signs or hazard signs, do not swim signs, et cetera? The answer is no. However, I asked the Department of Health, Gary Gill and his subordinates to please put one up, one that they had, and they said they would not do it until they went out and looked around. I had a meeting with Grove Farm management the other day, asking them if they would put up a sign, and that people here at the table, we have made copies of the signs that the Department of Health has at Honolulu River. So we have the signs already, but we're asking Grove Farm to put it up on their property, because it's their property. And so they are waiting to hear from the Department of Health also. So the answer is that no, the public is not being warned about the potential public health risk in that water. And I would simply ask all of you here today to tell your friends, and if you're down there, tell anybody that's in the water that that water is pretty polluted, and we recommend that you don't go in.
Human enterococcus. Would you repeat that, please? The pollution, is it human or is it animal-based?
The state has done three different tests, and all of them show that there's human waste component. Not necessarily 100% human, but there is a human, all three tests showed positive for human probable cause.
I've been led to believe that all of the tests that the state does is in open ocean water, and the only tests that do streams or runoff are done by the Surfrider Foundation. And they seem to give a higher fecal content and an extreme, like what I've heard is in Honolulu, Wailua, and also in Nauwiliwili, in the stream coming out of Nauwiliwili by the Marriott, up the stream behind, what do you call that? No. Yeah. And down here at Winters Cove are the 3 or 4 most polluted of all.
Trying to summarize what the gentleman just said, was that the Department of Health only tests the water at beaches. They do not test any of the streams because the funds that they get from EPA under the Clean Water Act are for beaches. So they do not test the sources of the pollution in the water. And that's where Surfrider comes in. As on your list, the top ones are the open ocean, but we also go and target what we suspect may be the sources, like Waipiali Stream. When we find a very high count, we then ask the Department of Health to please go and find that, test that. And they usually do at some point. But they went out once.
I understand from the documentation the Department of Health has not yet issued their permit, which is required. And so my suggestion is for those people who are going to be contacting Gary Gill and others and my question also is, don't you think the Department of Health themselves should require the environmental assessment, considering the probable cause that we've demonstrated?
The comment that the lady made was she understands that the Department of Health has not issued the permit yet. The only permit that is outstanding from the Department of Health is the permit that would allow them to set up a milking facility. And that, as of this afternoon, we have not heard that that has been issued yet. The Department of Health is working with the EPA and looking at what, under what regulations they can require an environmental assessment or a National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit, NPDES permit. So they are examining those possibilities. And what I have said to the Department of Health and EPA is that the water testing, the numbers I have, showed that they have violated their conservation plan to an extent that they now are required to do an NPDES permit. So they are considering that, I guess the right word, request from Surfrider.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Brian.
I was wondering if anybody has asked why they decided on Mahalapu when they have all the land in Grove Farm. Why would they?
The question was, has anyone asked them why they picked Mahalapu? And this was done at the very first meeting at Kauai Community College, and they admitted it was not their first choice, it was their second choice. But to get anything further than that, you should ask the dairy farm people themselves.
Aloha. I'd like to respond to that with information in that their first choice was land up near the Humane Society in Hauula that they had negotiated a lease with Grove Farm for that property. However, another billionaire from Kentucky found out about it and offered to buy that property outright from Grove Farm. Grove Farm said, well, look, can we have our cake and eat it too? Okay, let's sell this land, which incidentally is going to be used to house some of these cows. Let's sell this land to him and convince them to put the dairy in Maha, ulepu. We've got a great place. Now, I'm 7th generation in Koloa District. I'm registered with the State Historical Society as a descendant of the Aboriginal stewards of this land. I am intimately familiar with the water, with the drainage, with the pollution, with the contamination, with the winds, and with the rain, and the spread of it. Pila Kikuchi was one of my teachers. Donald Kalaluna was another one of mine. Francis was another teacher of mine. When I came home 25 years ago, I did all my papers and studies for my baccalaureate on Koloa and Pa'a, Maha ulepu, and I've continued that for 25 years. You're only scratching the surface of the contamination and the pollution from the large pits where industrial stuff was dumped in and covered up by Koloa Sugar before they sold it to Grove Farm, to this stuff done in the 50s of dumping. The lands that are still under GMO production, these settling ponds for the excavations that they were doing at the mining, all that is being flushed down that flume that you call the stream going in there, which actually is a ditch diversion. The actual stream bed runs by Gillian's, and in 2006, when we had 40 days of rain, it jumped the channel and went back to the original stream. I have photos of the contamination at those stream entrances where you've got gray scum, bubbles this thick, you know, ringing around with black flecks over the top of it. Another thing that is barely mentioned, property values going down. Well, the water there that comes in from Ulepu Valley drifts, as it was said, down towards Poipu, and then you've got the runoff from the old streams down by Spouting Horn that runs off and runs up, and they kind of converge right there, right past Whalers Point, right past Koloa Landing, and carry it out and distribute it around. The winds, the Naula wind from Ni'ihau that you have, the very still Kona wind, comes in there at Maha Ulepu, and you'll see the hanging rains where it's like a hanging mist. Think what that will do when, you know, there's no air movement, no trade winds. All of that will carry around to Poipu, and the area that has been touted as the vacation destination for Kauai since my father's generation and my great uncles were on the planning commission and developed it for visitors. Hey, if you can't go to the beach, if the beaches are closed, who's going to come here?
Mahalo. Thank you very much for your input.
I think you've done an excellent job with the facts, and now that Hawaii Dairy Farms has come out with this very nice ad, is there any plans to almost say, now here are the real facts, and almost refute it line by line?
The question was, do we as Friends of Mahalo intend to put out an advertisement refuting all of the facts that are in their advertisement? We have not discussed that yet.
Oh, I'm sorry, we have.
They have.
We have. Let me interject. Next Wednesday, we'll have a full-page notice, and we will address everything they brought up, and we will have the facts.
Okay.
Can I do a part two? Besides the Hyatt, you know, obviously it's there's a strength in numbers. What other organizations, what other associations, I know, you know, PKA, what other groups have been educated on the facts, as you've done so well this evening, to gather more strength in numbers?
The question that he asked was what other organizations or groups have joined in this effort?
I would offer that Surfrider has been very involved with Friends of Mahalapu. A lot of its members are also Friends of Mahalapu, but they also support us in the work that we're doing and the monitoring. And also the Sierra Club. We have the Sierra Club officers that want our communication. They're on our email list. I fully expect that if we had to do something legally, we would probably have their support. We have talked, as I said, to a couple of law firms on Oahu in anticipation and preparation. Don't want to go there, really don't. I think if a lot of you, really seriously, if a lot of you send letters to the Department of Health that indicate your fears for this community, your community, and let them know you care, I do think it can make a difference. Malama Mahalapu is working with us. They have had a separate identity for years. When we had our initial first meetings, Burl Blake, Greg Peters, many of their members were with us. We talked about it, you know, and our focus was to try and help the environment down there as it relates to this industrial dairy. That was our focus. And they said, we've got a lot on our plate. We're working, you know, the national parks came in there and did a beautiful national park survey. That's on our website too. And you can see all the wonderful things the national park developed about Maha ulepu. There's late native Hawaiian plants in there that are very rare, endemic just to that area. There's the blind cave spider. There's the Koloa duck. There's a lot of species. And I think Joanne Yukimura is here, and she was instrumental with Malama Maha ulepu. But they're with us. They're supporting us. But they said, you guys have such a big mission. We're with you. Form your group, and we'll give you all the help we can. And we've joined forces with them, and they are helping us. And I can't tell you, I mean, there's probably 40 people from Malama Maha ulepu that are also friends of Maha ulepu.
Next is Joanne.
Joanne, did you have a question?
Joanne, you want the mic?
If it's human bacteria that you found in your studies of polluted waters, and there's sewage sludge being churned into the soil, isn't that the likely source? That's number one. And number two, are those coming from the lands that are part of the dairy property? Or, I mean, because there seems to be a separate but related, really big problem here.
Yes. So Joanne's question was whether all of the bacteria that we were finding, whether that was coming from human sewage, and do we know the source of it? And secondly, that we discovered all of the sludge disposal. That's a whole nother problem, whether or not it gets into the stream at Waiopili. The answer to that is that the Department of Health is has come out and walked the property and doesn't think that the sludge facility contributed to the water quality degradation. However, they did no soil testing, no looking for lava tubes or cinder cones or anything like that, and they don't know about the septic pits and the things like that. So they did a very cursory statement and overrode it, and they are coming out to do a much more detailed survey in a couple of weeks. It's already been scheduled, where they will be going all over all the ditches, all the systems, and be getting samples to really try to identify what is the source of that bacteria. And so at the moment we can't say, but Joanne, your comment was very well made. It was a real shocker to me when I discovered there was that there. Let me get some other folks too. Yes.
Information.
Off of one thing. The other part of your question, Joanne, was the proximity. If you know where CJM stables are, the sludge spreading of treated human sludge was across from the stables and somewhat remote from the Waiopili. There's a good distance between the two. And it's not at all close to the properties of the dairy site, the proposed dairy site.
But it is
But
Grove Farms.
It's all Grove farmland, but the Waiopili actually gets its receiving waters from the proposed dairy site where all the grubbing and grading are going. There's three, basically, as I understand it from the DNA testing when we met with the State Department of Health, there's pig, cow, and human. And they didn't quantify or say which was the greatest contributing cause. Does that help? Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. I wanted to thank you all for this great educational presentation that you've done tonight to educate the community, and the previous things that you've done to educate us. It's been great. But, well, my question is, my question is, how much effort has been put into contacting the one person who could change all of this, who is Pierre Omidyar, the billionaire? Instead of suing people and creating and spending all the money that it's going to take and all the months and years it's going to take to change this, why can't we put a lot of effort into to try to communicate with this man and educate him? He's an amazing human being. He's created probably one of the most progressive journalistic organizations in the history of mankind, called The Intercept. It's online, you can find it. Has any effort been made to contact him? And I hear that he's really hard to get a hold of or hard to pin down, but why can't we? Does anybody have his phone number?
Bridget will answer that question for you.
Yes, we have really tried. We had their board of directors address. We've known when board of directors were meeting on this issue, just the dairy. We had at least 14 members of Friends of Mahalapu write detailed, cogent, well-done letters and mail them to him. One of the people that's in the audience tonight, Jackie Hoban, can attest to the 3 times she tried sending letters. None of the 14 letters, and I believe, Jackie, none of your letters were ever answered, were they? No, none of our letters have ever been answered. And the last round of letters was just before a big board meeting they were having, and they're not a very large board. It's Pierre, his wife, Kyle Dada, and basically one other person at Ulupono that make up the board that deals with the Ulupono initiative and the venture capital side of the firm that has this dairy plan under their purview. And I asked Kyle Dada in a meeting with him on April 4th, if something happens and the farm does operate and there's damage done, who is the owner? And he said, Ulupono. There's no other partners. They started with other people, but he said now it's just Ulupono initiative. It's just Piero Midyar. It's Piero Midyar's venture, and frankly, he didn't care to address any of the concerns. And I mean, we've had retired executives that are better spoken by far than I am that wrote really great, compelling letters and said, just meet with us. Just come down and take a look at this. Just listen to the people. Hear what this place means to this island. Get a feel for it. You know, and there was one fellow that kind of offhandedly commented in a letter to the editor that Piero Midyar is developing the Hanalei Ridge, and he's building a resort there. And maybe he wants to yuck up the South Shore to drive business to the North Shore. You know, who knows? But I can tell you, yes, we've tried and tried hard, and we have had no answer, not one. He lives on Oahu, and his children go to school there. And so do everybody, all the administrative heads for this operation live on Oahu. Well, he's very wealthy.
Yay for money.
I think about ready to close, yeah. Okay, we're going to take one more question and wrap it up. Go ahead.
Is there any truth to the rumor going around that Hyatt has said they will sell their operation if the dairy comes in?
I can tell you that okay, I'm sorry. The question was, is there any truth to the rumor that the Hyatt will sell their operation if the dairy gets an operating permit, which they don't have yet? We met with the owner's representative about a week and a half ago, and he was very gracious, and he said that the owner actually considered selling. If you know anything about hotel industry, there's someone that owns the land and owns the Hyatt itself and the golf course, and then Hyatt is a management corporation that comes in and runs it for the owner. Okay? So it would be the owner of the property that would sell, and the Hyatt could still stay there for the new owner. But the owner, really great people, and they have a really sharp guy that is their representative, and they said, you know what? We shouldn't pass this mess to anybody else. We've got to take it head on here.
Okay, we'd like to thank you for...
And let me share.
Okay, go ahead.
The State Department of Health, the Director of Wastewater, informed us that the Hyatt's lawyers are doing a great job, and they are making the state listen. So the Hyatt has, and then she said to us, Eileen will remember, she said, and they're costing them a lot of money. It's costing the owners a lot of money.
A lot of money,
yeah, a lot of money. So the state has seen enough in their dealings with the lawyers that they know the lawyers are doing their homework, but we need to do ours too. Because we're a community, we live here, it's our homes. I live in Kaloa. I'm not going to be as immediately impacted as the coastal properties, but it's still going to affect my quality of life and most of yours.
How can I get, who do I contact about getting hazard signs out there? So these innocent people that don't know, children.
Gary Gill, 808-586-4424. Gary Gill, that's who you call about the sign.
His secretary will give you his mailing and email address, I'm sure.
Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you all very much. We'll stick around for a minute if anybody has more questions.